Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Masha Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, on today's episode. Masha and I are happy to be speaking with author Harry Max about his book, Managing Priorities, How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. So let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Hey, Masha.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Harry. Welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you here. I believe you are from the West Coast. Whereabout?
Just a hair north of Santa Cruz. I'm in the mountains, the Redwoods, Boulder Creek, as it turns out.
Oh, very nice. So another American for this
Excellent.
one. Amazing. Yes.
Yeah, that's another one. That's a great way for us. We have a lot of guests on the show that are from Toronto.
I think 2025 started with a bang for Americans. So hopefully it's going to be a good year for America.
I'm setting a trend here. This is
Well,
good.
and I'm glad it wasn't actually a bang that it started with.
True.
That's right.
Yeah, a friend of mine in Canada, in
Metaphorically
Vancouver.
speaking. Yeah.
A friend of mine in Vancouver says that where I live is a proper mountain town.
Oh, okay.
Proper mountain town.
Very nice. So priorities is one of those things that as product managers we always think about, and I always struggled with priorities, and I always try to learn new ways to do priorities, and maybe the word struggle is not the right word there, but struggled in like, how do I make priorities not just mine, but the entire team and the entire organization, because it doesn't go just one level. And then when I found out about your book, I was like, oh, I have to read this book. And the book is talking about priorities in general, but it's very actionable for product managers. So I would recommend every product manager to read it. But let's start in the beginning. Tell us a bit about yourself, Harry, where you're coming from, and how did you get to write the book?
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it short. At this point, I'm what I call a player coach. It's kind of a consultant and embedded executive coach. So I typically go into organizations and work with senior level leaders, typically product design, development arenas. And I do executive coaching from within those roles, and often, operating model and product operating model change work that goes on that's really difficult to do as a consultant or an executive coach. So it's a bit of blending being an innie, somebody who's actually there, with somebody who's got and can maintain the perspective being outside. And I came to this through kind of a long history of being an individual contributor, and then being a manager, and then a manager of managers, and then eventually a leader, and then a startup entrepreneur founder, and then an executive in public companies. So I've had a broad range of both inside, doing the work, getting my fingernails dirty in product design, development, technical documentation, all of that kind of inside companies, to being a consultant and strategy person, and really wrestling with what it means to help individual contributors and managers and leaders figure out how to focus on the right things, and pull off sometimes very, very difficult visions that they want to realize. The book sort of kind of came into focus because I was working at a company called Rackspace. It was a hosting company in San Antonio, Texas, and I had been recruited there to build the experience design team and help contribute to building a new product organization as the company was moving into the cloud. And with my executive coaching background, I was always spending time mentoring and coaching people. And I started getting a lot of feedback that one of the things that I had been teaching and mentoring people, the framework, a problem-solving framework that I was using, was really having a big impact on people's lives, not only inside the company, but outside the company with their families and in their, churches and in other places. And the company came to me and asked me to do a TEDx talk on this subject. I was like, that sounds interesting and hard and fun. I'm, as terrified a public speaker as anybody, so I thought it would really stretch me. And it did. What was so fascinating about it is I got out there and I did the TEDx talk, and that talk turned into a longer talk that I gave at South by Southwest, and I started getting invited to other companies to give this talk. And the strangest thing happened is that, I was fascinated with this. And the topic was called "The Problem is Not the Problem," and it's about problem framing and intervention strategies for, looking at different types of problems and how do you intervene to address those challenges at different scales and whatnot. But it didn't seem like anybody was really connecting with the material. But in that talk, I touched on the topic of prioritization. I had done a lot of prioritization, both for myself and, with teams and at the leadership level. And so I'd had a lot of experience with it. And so when I saw people asking questions about prioritization and none about the problem framing or the diagnostic thinking or the intervention strategies, of course, being a product guy, I'm like, light bulb, that's a demand signal. There's some unmet or underserved need as it relates to prioritization. And it occurred to me, I wonder if there are any good books on the topic. And so I went looking and I couldn't find anything. And I thought, this is impossible, right? It is such a fundamental topic. There has to be a good book on it. And so I called a friend of mine who happens to be a publisher. It's Lou Rosenfeld from Rosenfeld Media. Rosenfeld's a competitor to O'Reilly, and Lou's been around a long time. And I told him about this experience, and he said, that's crazy. That can't be true. There has to be a good book on the subject because it's fundamental to business. And it's so central to the work that we do as product people and designers and product managers and whatnot. And then he came back and said, I can't find anything. He said, I found tons of books and videos and blogs that talk about how important it is, but no holistic resource that looks at prioritization for companies and organizations, for teams and individuals, that unpacks that topic on its own. And he said, you got to write the book. And I thought, piece of cake. How hard could it be? That was 20.
Every author's.
Well, I'd written other books, and
there you go.
And I'd been in online technical documentation for a long time. And so here it was, 2015, and I was like, it'll take me a year, maybe two. And I wrote the first draft, and I had some help doing it. We won't go into that story, but I put the first draft together and I handed it to my esteemed colleagues, my closest friends and associates, and my partner, and every one of them said, this is awful.
Oh,
And
no.
you should stop now and change careers or change directions, but give up on this. This is a bad idea. It's terrible.
Wow.
And
Why?
and I thought, well, that's fascinating. And I took it on as a challenge. And now
down.
here it is almost 10 years later. And the book came out 6 months ago. It's being well received, and I'm glad because it turned into kind of a mission to get it done.
Oh, that's
That's great.
amazing. Well, first of all, kudos for your perseverance with that.
Or
And
stupidity.
no,
Sometimes negative feedback is the best feedback.
Yeah.
It's an area to improve. If everyone said it was great out the gate, you'd be like, oh, okay, I don't have to do anymore. But you actually doubled down and went deeper into it, so it's good.
No, but I also love your attitude that negative feedback did not nod on you and did not put you down. It actually gave you a challenge. And I will show that there is something in there. And we are the winners. All the readers and people that are learning from this are the winners of this, challenge. And what you might call stupidity, I would call perseverance. So,
Yep, that's the grit.
Exactly, that's perfect.
I'm glad to have it done.
No, the book is very readable, and it's very actionable, which I really love. I always love actionable books that you put down and just start implementing them, even if you don't implement all of the things in there, because there is a lot there. You still can start in steps. And I wanted maybe to just mention a few things and for you to tell us about them. The first one is the DGAP.
Mhm.
I don't know if I pronounce it properly. It's a DEGAP.
Yeah.
But it is a word, DGAP, and you have that bridge where you're degapping that gap of I'm not sure what is the gap. Like the gap
Mhm.
could be anything really, right? That you need to prioritize.
Yeah.
Um, but this is really even before you start prioritization. The P at the D gap is the prioritization, but then you
Mhm.
have all the step before that. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, DGAP is an acronym. Each of the letters stands for a phase in the process, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, as you're well aware. And I didn't invent it; I just discovered it. Right? I mean, I did label it, I gave it a name, but the phases, the 5 phases, were there before I named them. I just didn't have names for them, and the more people I talked to, the more I realized that prior to prioritize is it's it's a verb, it's a process, and it's not just the act of prioritizing. It's actually the stuff that happens before it too. So I liken it to having worked at DreamWorks Animation, where we worked on Shrek 2 and we made movies that were very well received and a lot of fun, very hard to make. And when people talk about animation, they often think about the process of like articulating the characters and making the faces move and having all that expression. But the process of animation is actually many process steps, and
Mm,
the act of animating the characters is just one piece of that. And it occurred to me, it's like skiing, right? Skiing isn't just the act of sliding down the hill. Skiing is the act it might be cross countries, there's different kinds,
Mm.
and it involves the act of preparing. It involves the act of, you know, actually learning how to ski. It involves, um, the you go down the hill and then you have to recover and you go up the lift, right? It's not just one piece. And so the
yeah.
the more people I talked to about prioritization, the more I realized that the term was overloaded. And when
Mm,
everybody I talked, one of the reasons it was so difficult to write about is when you talk about something and people think it's one thing, but it's actually many things, that teasing apart what all the other parts are so that people can think about it in a more uh, a richer, more nuanced way makes a big difference. So the the idea behind DGAP is that in every circumstance, regardless of what it is, it's an emergency response situation, or product design and development, or risk management, or financial planning, it really doesn't matter. There's always a gap between a current state, as is state, and a desired future to
mhm,
be state.
mhm,
Well, how do you get from here to there?
mm,
Right? Well, you have to, sometimes you plan, but you always make decisions and you always engage in some kind of action. But to do that, you typically have to figure out what's most important and what's least important. And you have to have a way of um, juggling the stuff that's in between there. And the more people that are involved in the process, the more complicated it gets.
mhm,
And so the idea of DGAP is that the very first step in the process really says, look, you have to decide whether you have the time to do it, right? Because you might not. You might just have to act. Might have to rely on your training and your instincts and just go, right?
mhm,
But for most people, under most circumstances, we almost always have enough time to ask ourselves the question, do I have enough time to slow down just enough to think about this in a way that might help me get to better results?
mhm,
So the D in the D gap is about decide if I have enough time. If I do, then I move on to E, which is really engaging in the process with stakeholders. Once I have made that commitment, I then begin gathering the G, gathering potential priorities and information about those priorities. And once I have those, then I call it arrange them, disambiguate, clarify, figure out what I'm going to actually use, whether it's a framework or a sorting technique or a marketplace simulation to do the prioritization.
Mhm.
Once I have all that, then and only then do I prioritize.
Uh-huh.
And so DEGAP is a way of just slowing down that word a little bit to get you to say, huh, if I've got a current state and a desired state, and I have enough time, the 60 seconds or so, to ask myself the question, do I have enough time? And if the answer is yes, okay, who do I need to talk to? And then what information do I need to gather? And then how do I need to wrestle that information to the ground? And what framework might make sense, or what sorting technique, or what marketplace simulation, or what hybrid technique might be useful? Uh, and then prioritize.
Yeah.
And then prioritization looks somewhat similar for individuals
Hmm.
and teams and organizations, but like anything, the more people you add, the more complicated it gets really, really fast.
Absolutely. And that's what you're going through in the book as well, where it's personal prioritization
Mm-hmm.
or team prioritization or organizational prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it very interesting and educational to me because I think about it in these terms, like I need to
Mm-hmm.
do prioritization for work or at work,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
who do I need to do it with, and how do I get their buy-in for this prioritization, et cetera, et cetera. But then also in my personal life, there is always prioritization that needs to be done,
mm-hmm.
in any just day-to-day basis or in
Getting out of
projects
bed.
that we're doing or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
You really put it in perspective. Like I just getting out of bed in the morning, you set up priorities. Like I got to do this, this, and this to get out the door to take on the day. And what's the day? What's my priorities to the day, my week ahead, my month ahead? And so you really do, yeah, as you think about it that way, priorities can really scale. I mean, they become a thing in themselves. So how do you handle, so if you're setting up priorities as an individual and even in an organization, I'm setting up priorities for myself. When other people start to get involved and they start to, if you say, I have time to do this, how do you interject other people coming into that and setting their priorities inside your priorities? And how do you stack all those together? Because I got to imagine it becomes a Lego set and you got to like put all those pieces together to get it all to work.
totally. And that's the magic of the whole thing, right? I
Okay.
mean, the magic of it is that, if you look at the Wizard of Oz, right, and you pull the curtain back and you see the old man with all the levers, making the big voice. Uh, the magic isn't actually trying to get people to really understand and work with your priorities as much as it's your job to understand their priorities and
Mhm.
to get to get them to see that you care about what they care about. Because the trick with prioritization when it moves from the individual to the team and from the team to the organization is way less about which method you use. It is way less about what process you use. And it's way more about getting people to feel like they're part of the process and that they are being heard and they're being seen and they're being taken seriously and their input is being considered. Because if people feel like they're being brought along in the process, if things don't turn out very well, they'll still be on your team, right? And the finger pointing and all the craziness happens when, you know, people feel like, well, I've got the right way to do it and your way is wrong. And,
Mhm.
and they start to force a process over other people and try to create their reality for them. I'm getting kind of inky in the description, but it really has to do with getting aligning. The way I thought about it when I was at Rackspace was, you know, it's very easy to like put a problem on the table and then have yourself on one side of the table and then have whoever you're working with on the other side of the table, right? And then fight over the problem. And the trick is put yourself on one side of the table, put who you're working with on the same side of the table, put the problem on the table, and
Uh,
then look at that to the solution on the other side. So you're working with people through the problem or through the challenge or through the opportunity to get to a better place. And I know that's kind of like a really maybe cheesy way of 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 reframing my answer around your question, but the trick isn't about prioritizing and about putting priorities together. The trick is about working together and collaborating and hearing people out and really listening and participating with them and understanding them.
I really like that. And so priorities really need to be flexible. Like you can set your priorities as an individual, but they have to accommodate when other people need to be involved.
Yeah, and the kind of a core tenet in the book is that your priorities are your inputs to your plans and your decisions. Your priorities are not your decisions. They're just your options.
Yeah.
And the point of good prioritization is to understand what your options are and which ones are more likely to yield better results, because then it becomes a conversation.
This actually brings a really interesting point. I'm reading now The Seven Habits of Effective People by
Hmm.
Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
And he one of the habits that he's talking about is empathy and listening to the others.
Yeah.
So that's
Hmm.
exactly that.
Yes.
And another one is a win-win. So getting into a win-win situation. But he also talks a lot in one of the chapters about the Eisenhower metrics. So
Hmm.
you bring the Eisenhower metrics as the first example of the simplest way to do prioritization,
Hmm.
where you have important and non-important on one axis and urgent and non-urgent on the other axis, and then you can prioritize based on that. So I see a lot of those synergies between, how these tools can make us much more effective as individuals, much more effective as teams, and moving into a much better future together.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the what some people call the time management matrix and other people call the Covey matrix, but what originated with Eisenhower. Um, and what's so interesting about it is that, if you step way back from prioritization and you just look at what does important mean, whether it's value or whatnot, and what does urgency mean? You know, the point that I was trying to make earlier about getting on the same page with people is people have very different ideas of what's important and they have very different ideas about what's urgent. And so that process of coming to a common understanding about what urgency means or what importance means is where the juice is. And in the book, I try really hard to make the case that urgency is really the wrong way to think about things in some ways, because urgency is not a thing outside you. Urgency is actually a felt sense inside you. And a better way to look at urgency is by looking at the cost of delay. And this is something I learned through Dean Leffingwell from the Scaled Agile movement when I went to get certified as a Scaled Agile consultant. Failed the test, by the way, which is really complicated, separate matter.
We
But
won't tell anyone, don't worry.
sometime I'll do it again. But the idea that cost of delay or the apparent cost of delay is a much stronger way of getting people to agree on what it means that something is really urgent or not, right? Because if you think about it, right, cost of delay, well, what is that? All right, well, the easiest, simplest example I can ever think of is airplane tickets, right? The tickets never get cheaper over time. They always get more expensive, right? And if the longer you wait, eventually you may not be able to get a good seat, and eventually you may not be able to get a seat at all. So there's a cost of waiting, a cost of delay, and the cost in the airplane situation is a cost of making a decision to go, which airline to go on, whether you're going to take a nonstop or, whether you're going to jump around different cities and so on and so forth. But the idea that, it's a lot easier to have a conversation about the cost of delay when you're talking to other people than it is to talk about urgency, because urgency means such different things to different people. But similarly, that notion of importance exactly the same, right? If you can get people to agree on what important actually means, and you've got some reasonable sense of agreement, all of a sudden something as simple as the Eisenhower matrix becomes very useful.
Mhm. Yeah, this is so interesting. While you were talking about that, I'm trying to run in my head previous experiences that I had in different companies where we're
Mhm.
trying to prioritize things, and everyone had different ideas about how should we prioritize it and what value means, and it makes it so hard. And maybe going back to how I started, that this is challenging for me. I think it comes from that, from the idea
Yes.
that I have my ways of thinking about priorities or what is important for me and what is not.
Mhm.
Other people have their ways of thinking about it. And the challenge is really not about the prioritization itself, but about working together.
Yeah, totally. And
Hmm.
there's this really, really cool idea in a book called The Wisest One in the Room. And the very first chapter in the book is on the topic of something called objective realism. And objective realism, as described in this book, is the seductive sense that our point of view is correct. Because to each of us, we think that what we think is right. Of course it is. Otherwise, we would think something else. The problem is that everybody has that. And there can't be an infinite number of truths, and there only be one truth. And therefore, everything has to be negotiated in a sense, right? Our sense of truth, whether it's about urgency or whether it's about importance or value or cost or whatever criteria you're thinking about or talking about or care about, those things have to be, when I they have to be agreed upon at least in some way. Like if I say the word
Hmm.
tree, right? I don't know, one of you might see a poplar, one of you might see an oak, but I see redwoods outside my house,
I
right?
saw a pine tree, so that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, the thing
I
is,
saw a
the
palm tree.
image, the right, the imagery that we have for the words that we're using is all different. And sometimes it's as simple as externalizing that. Well, what are you seeing when you're saying that? Oh, I'm seeing this. Oh, that's not what I was seeing. I was seeing this. Oh, okay. Well, and so if you can work with other people to get some common sense of what you're talking about, then even if you can't agree on the thing, you can agree on a range of the things,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. It- um, One of the things that also, while you were talking, I was thinking about, I became over the years a bit stickler on words exactly because of that,
Yeah.
because I wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing and not about different things. But it can annoy a lot of people. Some people are like, why are you even talking about that? Why are you wasting our time with that?
Mhm.
And they don't really understand that, the importance of getting on the same level of
Mhm.
understanding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
important.
And that's the art. The art is not annoying people in that process. And
I
and I
learned
am
that also the hard way.
yeah, because I mean I'm a little bit the same way as you might imagine, right? It's often about, do we need to be precise or do we need to be accurate? Why are you bringing this up? Well,
Yeah.
because precision and accuracy are different, right?
Hmm.
Accuracy is like being directionally correct, while precision is about getting the right letters in the right order and having the right math. And sometimes that matters, but
Hmm.
helping people go on that journey with you is where the art is.
Mhm.
Yeah. I always think shared understanding. When we were talking about that, I think of that picture where people go into a room together and then they say, yeah, we all agree. And they come out with different visions of like what a shape is. So if you say shape, they're thinking
Totally.
just like what you said about trees, they're thinking triangles and squares and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
having a shared understanding is
Yeah.
vital.
And the
Absolutely.
challenge with prioritization is that's happening. It's an end by end problem in prioritization because it's not only about the criteria that you're using to evaluate the priorities or the potential priorities, but it's about the actual items themselves, the potential priorities. People
Yeah.
don't agree on what you're talking about. People don't agree on how you're going to evaluate what you're talking about. And like that John von Neumann quote, I just love, the famous mathematician. He says, there's no reason to get very specific about things that you know nothing about, right? And when you have multiple people talking about something, you generally people are having they're making very strong points and trying to come from a very strong point of view. And often they're really animated and really excited about it, but they don't realize that communication is really about getting the other people to see things the same way.
Yeah. Now the book naturally is mentioning quite a bit of priorities, ways to prioritize, but they're really summarized at the appendix, more at the end. But you also have there one that it was the first time I read about it or heard about it, the Max Priorities Pyramid, and which is, I don't know, I was always at the time thinking, is it named after you or is it the word max, like maximum? Maybe it's both.
Yeah,
But
very clever.
of course, it's very clever. You put it together, right? So tell us a bit about that.
I will admit that is actually my name, and
Okay.
it is definitely not because I wanted my name associated with that pyramid, but because there are multiple prioritization pyramids, and other people that I was talking to over a period of years that I was working on the book and working with them and using this tool said, you really have to call it that. And so I did it not out of ego, really, because I don't want the attention, but I did it because it was a way of differentiating the fact that there is a simple way of looking at a fairly complex set of priorities.
I see.
When the prioritization pyramid that I use, the max prioritization pyramid, allows for two things that are very difficult in something as simple as the Eisenhower matrix. It allows multiple time horizons, which the Eisenhower matrix does not. It also allows for multiple categories. So, for example, the Eisenhower matrix has two dimensions, urgency and importance, but it doesn't let you categorize things. And so from a product point of view, it's very difficult to say, okay, these are bugs and these are new features, or these are, whatever. You would have to color code them and make that up in the process of using that. In fact, that tool just doesn't have affordances. It doesn't lend itself to that type of sophistication. The max prioritization pyramid was particularly helpful and sort of became a tool that I use on a regular basis in organizational contexts where there tended to be a lot of things required to run the business to keep things going across multiple categories. So, for example, in a large product organization, there's always going to be tech debt, right? There's always going to be defects. There's always going to be new features and capabilities. There's always going to be automation and new things that you can do to increase operational efficiencies. At a minimum, there's those four. And those are just the ones that I run into on a regular basis. But you can call them anything, really. And so having a way of lining up priorities so that things that are required to run the business well are structured against categories like that, for example, that makes sense, is very, very helpful, because now different teams and groups and people with different expertise can look at it and go, oh, these really aren't in conflict, right, in the way that they might appear to be in another tool. There may be some conflict, but often there isn't as much conflict as people think. Where a lot of times people get confused and where conflict shows up is when you have competing priorities, but they're on different time horizons. And so the max priorities pyramid says, look, there may be things that are very important long term, and there may be things that are absolutely crucial short term. But how do you connect those things? And those are going to be the kinds of medium term strategic investments in work and team building and capability building that you might want to do. And so having a single unified picture that allows you to connect the things that are required to really focus on the immediate short term and what's required for success now, and line that up with where you're really trying to go and what you're really trying to accomplish, and then connect that through these kind of medium term strategic priorities, makes it a lot easier to just see and debate with people about what's most important. So it's a complex tool to talk about without looking at.
Sure.
And I realize we can lose people in that conversation. I've successfully
Well,
lost people in this
we
conversation
encourage
before.
we encourage people to go and get the book and check it out in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and anybody can email me and I can send them a poster, a blank poster of this, right? You can put it
Amazing.
up on your site if you want. It's Creative Commons licensed, and you can print it out full size, or it's available on Miro, right? There's a template on Miro for it, so you can grab it there as well, and we can put that in the show notes if people
Yeah,
want it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And
If you
that way
can
they don't
send it
need
to
me.
us, if you
Mm-hmm.
send it to
Yeah.
us, we'll put it in there.
you
Amazing.
know,
Amazing.
and I've had very, very good feedback because it seems to bridge the gap between the tools that work in the very specific product realm, like uh, like buy a feature or
Mm-hmm.
rice or a simple weighted scoring or um, things I'm not as fond of, like Moscow, or even non-prioritization frameworks like the Kano method or Kano method. I never quite know if I pronounce it properly.
Mhm.
But when you need something that can really help you with a heavier lift and help you have a conversation with an executive staff, the max prioritization pyramid is very strong there. One of the great challenges a lot of product managers have is it's hard to get a seat at the table, right? Where the decision makers are saying, okay, all right, we've got the prioritization, but how are we going to allocate resources and money, right? And it's a lot easier to explain that story when you can show your roadmap and connect your roadmap to strategic priorities and then show them all of what's necessary just to run the business that you have today and why it's crucial to get incremental funding, for example, for a set of things that are going to help those executives achieve the visions that they have, right? That's a pretty big load to put on a tool,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
As,
it's real
yeah.
helpful for that.
As you're going through this, I'm thinking about what the product management space does. You have your tickets in Jira all the way down to a user story, and then
Yeah.
all that bubbles up to the feature, and that might bubble up
Yep.
to a feature roadmap, and that roadmap might bubble up to a strategic roadmap, and all these different components that the product management space goes through. But if you're down in the ticket looking at a story, trying to relate that to a strategic goal of the business, you know, looking at a screen is very difficult. So prioritizing that in that moment is certainly tough for people.
Yeah, and I think what happened for me is that over, you know, I hate to say it, 20 years plus, it just became increasingly obvious to me that it was easier to see through the lens of priorities than it was through the lens of goals and objectives, or the lens through of strategies, or the lens of products and features and whatnot. It was easier to look through that lens, and it was easier to communicate to senior people. And even in fact, it was easier to communicate to senior people. It was easier to communicate to my peers, and it was much easier to communicate to folks who worked for me. So, for example, when I was at Rackspace, people would come up and they'd say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And they would expect me to say, "What are you working on?" That's not what I said. What are your top three priorities? Right? I don't care what you're working on. I care what you're prioritizing,
What
because
we're
you may
trying to
very well
get.
be
Yeah.
right. And I know if they're prioritizing this and the manager they report to is prioritizing that, and I'm prioritizing these other things, if those are out of alignment, we have a problem.
One question, maybe for me, probably the last question that I have. If someone is coming to you and asking you, okay, tell me which prioritization method to use, right?
Yeah.
What is your answer to that?
I was really hoping you weren't going to ask me this question.
I mean, this is really like some people want shortcuts and they just want to learn from the best and to say, okay, if this is the best one, let's do it.
Yeah.
Other people, they will try many different things. Other people will inherit something from someone else, or they
Mhm.
will just use the first thing they found or the easiest thing they found and then ignore the rest. But you've seen a lot of this. You have that experience. You
Yeah.
build your own pyramid matrix for that. So, you know, looking at you as an expert on this now, what would you say?
Um, I I'm going to give you two answers. One
Mhm.
answer is it depends. but I'm only going to give you that answer because now I'm going to give you the answer to the question you asked, which is the if I had to shoot from the hip and pick one method, I would actually choose the Eisenhower matrix, but I would implement it the way that John Cutler does. So if you don't know John Cutler's work, that guy is brilliant. And one of the things he figured out that I did not figure out was how to use the Eisenhower matrix in a team context. And he calls it the magic trick. And so you can go to his site and sort and search on the magic trick. And what you're going to get is a really clean description of how to use the Eisenhower matrix for teams in a product organization. And it's really good. If I actually went so far as to take a class with him because I really wanted to see it from the outside in. He just recently took a new gig as a head of product
Right.
for a company at Dots or something. I can't remember the name. And I'm sure he's going to do amazing work there. But there aren't a ton of people that I learned so much from so quickly, but I learned a lot from him and I learned it fast. And part of that was because I already knew what I was looking for.
Right.
But if I had to rewrite the book right now, I would either add a chapter with that in it, or I would take out the max prioritization pyramid and replace it with this,
Oh, wow.
because I think it's so much more directly applicable. There's like a gap in the book right now on this subject, which is for product teams. What is the kind of go-to simplest best method that you can use in almost any circumstance? And I would say it's that.
I see.
Yeah.
But you eventually you didn't really write, although your background is similar to ours, from product and to our audience, you didn't really write the book just for product teams. You wrote it in overall for many different types of prioritization, right? But it's always great to see, new learnings and new things that are coming out, and John Cutler is definitely a thought leader out there that a lot of us are learning from.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
100%.
really, really wonderful.
Cool.
That's great. Matt, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, my last question would be if someone is setting out, they thought they had priorities in line, they thought they had it all together, but they need some help. What would be your recommendation for like, hey, where do I start setting my priorities correctly?
Well, I think I would probably run back through the process real quick, but I would probably not start at D. Am I going to decide? I would probably ask myself, do I have the right stakeholders? And I would probably loop through that process once more. Say, do I have the right stakeholders? Have I really considered what I need here? And are my needs and my team's needs aligned with the broader stakeholders who include, my customers, my suppliers, my vendors, my peers, and so on and so forth. So I might take a step back and ask myself, am I being intellectually honest with where I'm getting input? And then that, of course, lends itself to, testing, gathering, right? Testing what you think the potential priorities are against what you have. Like, are you missing some? Have you misunderstood what the criteria for evaluating the priorities are? That's probably the place they went wrong, right?
Gotcha.
It's not that they missed individual items, but they probably just didn't capture some critical dimension that is essential to understanding how those priorities are going to inform better plans or more impactful decisions. And then, they can kind of massage stuff and then go back into the prioritization process itself. Did they pick the right method, or it's not even the right method? It's super cheap. What I should have said was, did they pick a method that helps them achieve what they're trying to achieve? So, for example, did they pick a visual framework because it was easier to work with their team, but it didn't allow enough traceability for an executive presentation, so they couldn't explain how they got there? Like, what was it what were the symptoms that told them that their prioritization wasn't durable, right? There may have been some telltale signs there, and you may be able to use those to kind of reevaluate what you're doing. Because The other cool thing is that once you do this enough, you just kind of get good at it. You get good enough at it that you don't stumble around and hurt yourself in the process, right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
That's a great advice right there. And I would add to that, just, buy the book and read it and then go and do it.
Go and apply it. Yep.
Amazing.
Appreciate that.
Of course. Where can people reach out to you?
I am super easy to find everywhere. Harry Max is, I've got my own website. LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to find me. Because that's where my social world is. I don't do anything substantive on X or Blue Sky yet, and I don't use Facebook and
Sure.
Instagram and all.
Yeah.
So if you have trouble reaching me, it's just I'm Harry Max, LinkedIn, or you can hit my email address, which is just harry@harrymax.com. But
Amazing.
yeah, and my email address is in the book too.
Right. Okay. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Harry, for coming on the show. It's been a great conversation. Thank you to
Super
all the
appreciate
guests.
it.
Moshe, thanks as always. And we'll talk to everybody next time.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you very
Take care.
much. Take care.
Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.